Do you love hearing no? I think it's baked into us from early on when we are that little kid who's learning to walk, learning to stumble, learning to talk. We are told, no, 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 no. Don't touch that. Don't do that. You're going to hurt yourself. As we grow up, surrounded by our families, by the school system, by teachers, by grown-ups, by adults, we get our jobs, we move into the workplace, we start our own businesses. Especially as entrepreneurs, we are told, no, 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 you can't do that. Why do you think that would work? Who do you think you are to do it? No, 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 no. And so when it comes time to pitch people, when it comes time to persuade, when it comes time to sell, when it comes time to market, when it comes time to get in front of someone, and we are working so hard to get them to say yes to the budget, to say yes to the project, to say yes to picking us. Deep down inside, whether you want to admit it or not, we don't like to hear no. No feels like rejection. It feels like we are that little kid being told by that grown-up that we are doing something wrong. And so often, people in business, people in negotiations, people in sales will bend over backwards to make sure that they are not rejected, that they do not hear that no. And that is a problem. Because if you do not get to know, if you do not get the prospect, if you do not get the customer to say no, then you are not doing your job. And in this episode, we are going to dig into that and explain why you want to go for no with Andrea Waltz. Now, Andrea is a renowned speaker and she's the co-author of the best-selling book, Go for No. She's also an expert on the power of rejection and how to leverage it for the success both in business and in life. Now, Andrea teaches companies about the mindset and strategies we all need to be able to handle rejection effectively and turn that no into an opportunity for growth. Now, here's a little bit more about Andrea Waltz's really deep career. She's a speaker and a trainer with over 2 decades of experience. She's renowned for her real practical tips and transformative approach to sales training, focusing on changing relate. Here's a few highlights of Andrea Waltz's career, just so you could see exactly how deep it is. She's a speaker and trainer with over 2 decades of experience helping businesses. Her book, Go for No, has sold hundreds of thousands of copies worldwide. It's considered an essential reading for sales professionals. She's been featured in numerous sales and business podcasts and webinars and conferences, and she's shared her insights on the power of rejection. And more than that, Andrea has experience working with companies of all sizes, from startups to Fortune 500 companies, helping them really understand why we should be embracing no, not fearing rejection, and doing everything we can to try and drive as much value for the prospect as possible. And so I want to welcome you to the How to Sell More podcast, the sales podcast for non-sales people, where each week we give a masterclass to help ambitious B2B leaders tackle the biggest challenge every business, every owner, every sales and marketing team faces. And that is, how do we grow revenue? I'm Mark Drager. Let's dig into it. So Andrea, no matter where one is in business, whether you're just starting out, you're 5 years in, you're 20 years in, you're 30 years in, you're always going to walk into a presentation or a pitch, or there's always going to be an opportunity that makes you uncomfortable because either the other people on the other side of the table, they're keeping their cards really close to the chest, or this is a really complex or big deal. So if you are listening to this today, I think you're going to get a lot out of this conversation because I want to talk about how we overcome that little bit of trepidation, that little bit of fear that happens to all people in a selling role, no matter whether you're a professional salesperson or you're the owner of the company. You're going to find yourself across from someone and you are going to be terrified. How do we deal with that?
I love it, Mark. This is my topic that I am so passionate about. So I've spoken about this whole idea of failure and rejection for the last 20 years. And you are so right. We all experience this. And the question is not, are you going to experience it? The question is, what are you going to do when you are faced with the potential of hearing a no? And how, when you get that no, how do you bounce back? How are you resilient? And so I'm super excited about our conversation.
So break down for me, how did you get into this? I mean, you've dedicated your life to it. So why this and why the go for no method?
So as it turns out, there is no college major called Rejection. Actually, what's funny is I met my husband, Richard. We run our business together. We have for over 2 decades. Met him at Lens Crafters. We were both working at Lens Crafters. I was running a $3 million location. I was the youngest general manager in the company's history. He was one of the training directors there. And he told me a story. And the story was pretty simple. It was about how he was selling suits for a living when he was a young guy. So this goes back a long time. And he was actually failing. He thought they were going to fire him. The district manager was coming in to see how everybody was doing. And my husband, Richard, thought that this would be a great opportunity for him to impress this guy, Harold, the district manager. And maybe they would give him some time to improve his sales. So the day that Harold shows up, this customer walks in and basically announces that he wants to buy an entire wardrobe of clothing. And my husband, Richard, got to help this man. He sold this guy a suit, a sport coat, slacks, shirts, belt, pocket square. Came to $1,100. It was this $1,100 sale. And so fast forward to today, that would be probably the equivalent of spending at least $5,000, right? So he has this great sale and he's thinking that Harold is going to come congratulate him for this sale. And instead of congratulating him, this district manager asked him this life-changing question. He said, Richard, out of curiosity, what did that customer say no to? And it was in that moment that Richard had to admit that customer hadn't said no to anything. He reviewed the sale in his mind, everything he laid in front of that guy purchased. And then Harold asked him the really important question. He said, if he didn't say no to anything, then how did you know he was done? And that was the really important question, because the only reason that Richard knew that customer was done was that customer had hit his mental spending limit. Whenever anybody got over $1,000, it was like, you're done. I'm going to send you to ring you up, send you on your way, right? You're done shopping. And Harold told Richard, he said, I watched you sell and you're not half bad, but your fear of the word no is going to kill you. If you could just learn to get over that, I think you could be one of the great ones. And he went home that night. He says, 2 letters from greatness. The letters were NO, and came back the next day and made it his mission to be willing to hear no more often. So Mark, when he's telling me this story, I actually have the opposite feeling. I'm not a failing salesperson. I was like a sales superstar. So he's telling me this. But then I had to get honest and I realized, I admitted to myself, I thought, I don't like hearing no either. Like, I will do things and prejudge people and not offer stuff that I think I'll just get a no to. Like, why offer it? I don't want to hear a no. That'll just devastate me and throw me off my game. So I'll just prejudge. And after he told me this, I applied Go for No. I fell in love with this whole idea of hearing no. I fell in love with the idea of overcoming rejection. And eventually we left our corporate jobs. We started our own business, in part just focusing on this topic. And so I've made it my mission to help people reprogram the way they think about failure and rejection to sell, serve, and succeed.
That is such a great story, because the truth is, I mean, no makes most people uncomfortable, right? If you look at one's personality, there is this metric about disagreeableness. And those who are much more comfortable being disagreeable, it just doesn't bother them if they kind of piss people off. And this could be cultural. This could be based on your age or where you grew up. But this idea of getting comfortable with the rejection, getting comfortable with the no. I was thinking, as you were speaking, about a post I saw this morning that said, if you're not getting hate on your social media posts, you're not making enough of a difference. And I thought, I don't want to play that social media game. Like, I don't want to go out there and piss off a bunch of people, because that somehow is an indicator that I'm now doing social media correctly. And I'm not willing to play that game. But it's the same fear of rejection when I'm speaking to someone. It's the same fear of me feeling like I'm pushing someone too far, or the budget's getting too large, or the deal's getting too complex. And so this costs all of us a lot of money, because we're not only leaving money on the table, but we're not even potentially pursuing the size of client, the size of deal. We're not making the investments. This can be hurting all areas of our sales and marketing growth within our companies.
Yeah, well, a couple things. I love what you said about that. I see those posts all the time. And it's funny because it really is your intention, right? If your intention is just to get on social media and be a jerk so that you get attention, you're doing it. I think you're doing it wrong as well. But really, the whole idea behind Go for No is to be willing to have the courage to ask and to be the one to take on the responsibility of shouldering that rejection. So, what I mean by that is, instead of relying on your customer or your prospect to come up with things, kind of that whole order taker mentality, or the whole thing of, hey, if they want it, they'll let me know, type of thing, to where then that leads to dissatisfaction because customers don't know what they don't know. And so you get home and you realize you didn't get what you should have gotten, or the person wasn't a good consultant and they didn't look at all of the offers and they didn't challenge you and say, hey, you might need to think of this. Hey, you might need to think of that. You might need to, you want an add on to your house? Here's why you should make the room even bigger. Have you considered these things? Instead of just being that order taker mentality, it's having the courage to get those no's. And as salespeople, good salespeople, it's our responsibility to shoulder that burden.
So let's assume that you're going for no and you get comfortable with this. What benefits? I mean, obviously more sales, great. But what are the soft benefits that I can't even imagine having? What are the soft benefits that I can't even imagine having by breaking through this fear of rejection, getting comfortable with no? What does this give people who have been through this and really understand how to work it?
So I'm glad you asked that, because one of the biggest benefits is just personal self-confidence. One of the fun things that we do in this, I do a Go for No 21-day challenge where people go for no for 21 days. They see how many no's they can get. And part of the challenge is what we call personal no's. Now, that doesn't mean having people tell you, no, I hate your shirt or something like that, like personal against you, but it's just making some, what I guess you'd consider scary asks in your day-to-day life. So you go to the nice restaurant, you see the cute table up front with the little flower on it and in the window, and then they walk you to the very back and set you by the water station, and you're like, oh, I really want that cute table up front. Well, now this is your opportunity to ask for that, or ask for an upgrade when you check into a hotel or whatever. Those are the day-to-day things. And so, Mark, what I have found is, yes, the sales are great, but probably the biggest transformations that I have seen are anecdotal in nature, because I have people email me like, I'm so much more confident. I feel so much more at ease. I'm not stressed out. I don't feel the pressure. I feel like I can reach out to people and I'm just not so worried about what they're going to do or what they're going to say. And so those benefits are so huge because it does wash over into people's lives. One of the people in my challenge had a kind of I don't know the background of it, but had a difficult relationship with her grandfather. And she decided that she was going to pick up the phone and call him. She hadn't talked to him in years. She was going to go for no with a family member. And she did. And they rekindled a relationship. So, which was so wild, that had never been done in any challenge that I had done before. So I see these really cool things happen, these really neat benefits that I didn't expect.
Let's say I'm having an introduction call with a prospect, meeting them for the first time. I imagine this is very different than if we're in the pitching phase or the scoping phase, or even trying to close the deals. So what does this look like at various phases of the sales process?
I love that you asked that. So it's kind of different for everybody. And the whole idea behind Go for No is that it can be layered into any process that you have. So whatever number of steps you have in your sales process, or whatever it is you sell, I think having Go for No top of mind and being aware that you want to hear no and that it's okay. So it starts at the beginning, though. If you are doing outbound, I think it starts with simple disqualification. And I remember listening to one of your podcasts. I want to say it might have been the one on LinkedIn. You guys were talking about this idea of disqualifying and how powerful that is, to be willing to ask the tough questions up front and get that no early, so that it saves everybody time. It saves you time. It saves this prospect time thinking that you have a solution that maybe in truth you don't. Maybe you're just not a good fit. So get the no early in the process. Then later on in the process, it could look like creating a awareness of what are the Go for No moments that you have in your process. Like, where are the other questions that come up in your discovery, for example? What are the things that you need to ask? Sometimes there are these, again, more tough questions where you'd rather not find out. You'd rather deal with it after you get the final yes and sign the contract, but be willing to ask those questions within that discovery. And then the most obvious one, of course, is just at the very end, depending on your process, asking for the sale. Like, hey, sounds like we're a go. Sounds like we should move forward. I don't care what how your language or messaging is on that. We don't teach scripting. But it is about, again, having that courage to make sure that you're asking. And what I find is that a lot of people do a lot of presenting and no asking.
I mean, I can guess why this is, but you have dedicated the last 20 years of your life to this. Why is that? We have fear of rejection. We're worried about looking like a fool or stupid or whatever it is. But why do we do it to ourselves when we know that it's hurting us?
Yeah, well, first of all, we are biologically wired to not be rejected. And we're looking for the easiest, I think the easiest way to do that is to not make waves, to not get no's. And I think humans we're optimists. We want to think everything's going to work out. So just keep going along and maybe we can literally bend, our will around this situation that's probably not going to work out and hope that we get the result that we want. So we'd rather just not make waves and just not get rejected, no matter how much the logical brain is like, hey, you're better off with no's. The emotional brain is danger. And that's part of what we talk about in our book, Go for No, which is a short fable. And one of the things that we start off with in that book is a model of failure and success, where we teach people a new model. And the old model is where you're in the middle, failure's on one side, success is on the other. And we see those two things as choices. Like we should either fail and get rejected, or we should go for yes and have success. But really, we're on one side, failure, rejection. Hearing the word no is in the middle of the process, and the yeses and the success that we're seeking is on the other side. So it's all about moving through that instead of trying to avoid it, instead of trying to go around. And again, I think the why is, I think it's biology. I think something else you mentioned in the beginning of this podcast was, I think it's cultural. And certainly, I do see that women have a tougher time. I think a lot of women that I have come into contact with over the years and have talked to, it's like they see, when they hear go for no, they think what that means is, okay, I'm going to badger you and twist your arm until you say yes. It's actually the opposite. It's no is a perfectly acceptable answer. The whole thing is we want to have the courage to ask. So it's very different than I think a lot of people think it is.
So can we play with a few things? Because I understand the concept and I want to kind of stretch it out to just understand it better.
Yes.
So first of all, I mean, there's this whole idea in sales that we need to start getting people to say yes, right? I don't know if it's NLP or I don't know where it comes from. This idea of you get to the first yes and it makes the second yes easier and the third yes easier. So the idea of pushing till you hit a no and then taking one step back feels like it will derail the momentum that we're building. What do we do with that?
Yeah. So, so much of this is counterintuitive. And I love that you're exploring these things. There's tremendous psychological safety in making sure that people feel like they can say no. And in traditional sales for the last, 50, 100 years, it's been all about persuasion. How do I convince you? And so what you have is a bunch of people in our society today who just seen those cliches and they don't want anything to do with sales. Everybody thinks, oh, a salesperson, they can't be trusted, they're pushy, they're aggressive, right? And they're going to mind trick you into saying yes. And Chris Voss talks about this in his book, Never Split the Difference, of this yes-oriented type salesperson. They're going to trick you into saying yes. Where really, if we provide that psychological safety of you can say no is actually a good thing, make people feel like they have the agency, which they already know they do. We're not giving people permission to say no. They know they can't. But when they feel like we have approved it and that we know that, then they're far more open to saying, okay, I'll take a look at what you have. In his book, Exactly What to Say, Philip Jones says there's a rejection-free script that he gives, a little line. And I love this and I agree with this, although I kind of push back a little on the idea of that it's completely rejection free, but it's very true. He says one of the things that you can say to not be quote unquote rejected is, hey, this might not be for you. So right off the bat, with that phrase, you're kind of pulling it off the table as an option. If I say, hey, Mark, this might not be for you, but I've got a timeshare in Florida. Have you ever considered coming out? Well, you might say, well, hang on,
I would
Andrea.
say no. Sorry, I had to jump on that great opportunity for a timeshare.
A lot of gators out here. There's a lot of gators. But you might say, well, hang on, Andrea, I'll decide. So don't say no for me. Let me. So suddenly you become open-minded when you understand that I'm not going to pressure you. But if instead I say, Mark, is it important for you to get away with your family every now and then just to reconnect? I mean, what a ridiculous question, right? And you see it a mile away. You go like, oh no, she's cornering me. What am I supposed to say? No, I hate my family. I don't want to go anywhere with them, right? And that's the difference.
That is so true. So this is a technique that I actually have a habit of using with my family members. My father-in-law is a very black and white person. He's actually spent his entire career in sales, so he knows sales strategies really, really well. But often, if I'm trying to, stir the pot a little bit, I'll ask him these leading questions, and he'll eventually stop because it's like you said. What's he supposed to say? He hates his family. He doesn't want to go anywhere with them or anything like that. So I ask him these leading questions that try to corner him in and pin him down, and eventually he'll just go, "Where are you going with this?" And it's fun when it's me and my father-in-law, but totally different when you're doing this with a prospect. So I did want to ask though about rejection, because rejection is very real. It's very painful, even if it's this thing we're afraid of that actually doesn't ever come to pass or not really come to pass as much as we think it's going to. The truth is that rejection sucks, and we have to deal with it all the time. And often it's not even so much the words people say, but it's the tone, right? It's the tone, it's their body language. I'll speak for myself at least. It gives me the feeling that perhaps I don't know what I'm talking about. And that's a very tough thing within a sales conversation.
That's a really tough rejection because it's very personal. However, one of the things that we talk about when we think about taking no personally is the no is never about you, even when it's about you. It's about the beliefs and the background and everything about the person that you're dealing with. And so in those moments, it's tough, but you really have to remind yourself of that and really detach from those kind of answers. I remember we did a Go for No movie several years ago where we drove around the country. We interviewed tons of people. One of the people we interviewed was these amazing artists. They were based in Sacramento, California. Very modern art and furniture that looks like it was designed almost like for Alice in Wonderland, like crazy dressers that are red and had unusual shapes and purple mirrors. I mean, it was the coolest stuff. And Richard and I loved it. We would have furnished our entire house with this stuff. It was so good. If it wasn't so, it was really expensive because it was amazing, one of a kind pieces, right? But you'd watch people walk by and comment on it, and the comments were painful. I felt bad for this couple even having to hear some of the comments that were said. And they told us, because we asked them, like, how do you guys deal with this? And they said, we just have to numb yourself to it. We have to remind ourselves that it's not personal, that whether somebody loves it or whether somebody hates it, that neither one of those are necessarily correct. It just has to do with the person it's coming from.
So one more, I guess, question I have around this idea of embracing no. I used to have a sales coach who said, some will, some won't, so what, right? Just move on. It's not the biggest deal in the world. Some people might use this to play such a numbers game that they don't mind if they're push. No. I'm just going to keep going, and I'm going to tear through people. There's a huge world out there. I don't mind if I upset people. I don't mind if I push them too far. Are there those others out here who are perfectly happy to just take what you say, run with it, and go out there and, rob, cheat, and steal?
Yeah. So I love that you bring this up because I do remember this discussion on another one of your podcasts, as a matter of fact. And, sales used to be, the numbers game thing was for real, right? And it was like, just do more numbers, just do more activity. And one of the things that Richard and I talk about in our programs is this difference between quality and quantity. And what we find, though, is that people who really have a problem with rejection simultaneously have a quantity problem. They're not talking to enough people. And so from that standpoint, the numbers have to be there. And what tends to happen when this happens is, well, first of all, they've got procrastination and call reluctance and all these things. And then they'll try one thing. They'll try a particular script, let's say, or a particular message. And they'll send 10 messages out and they'll go like, okay, well, that didn't work. Wait a minute. You can't, there's no data for that. You can't send out 10 messages and decide that message didn't work. You've got to send that to 100 people, 1,000 people, ideally, to then look and say, okay, of those 1,000, how many said yes to a meeting? How many said yes to having some information sent, et cetera, and on down the funnel. So from that standpoint, I think the numbers piece plays into it because we find that the quantity is missing in people who have a fear of rejection. They're not filling the pipeline, bottom line. Now, can you take it too far? Absolutely. You see it on LinkedIn all day long. You know, people are doing, 5,000 DMs with these automation things. I think it's terrible. They're not customized, and that's why they're not winning. I mean, it's awful. And so you have to have that balance. And one of the things that we have this cool diagram in a book that we wrote last year called When They Say No. And it's how to deal with the no's once you get them, right? And this graphic takes two considerations in mind. I won't go too deep into it, but I'll just say this. You look at the results that you want, and you also look at relationships. So when you cross-reference those two things, what you want to be in the quadrant that has a high concern for both results and relationships. And so when you are thinking of both of those things, that will allow you to both go for no in a quantity way, but also do it in the most quality way possible.
I've been speaking with Andrea Waltz, who is the co-author of the book Go for No and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you go to Amazon, you can certainly pick up the book and you can listen to it on Audible as well. Now, I do have one more question for you. I would love to know what your number one tip or strategy is for us to sell more.
Yeah. So my number one tip is don't make assumptions. Making assumptions is like kryptonite for Go for No, because assumptions kill sales. You assume what somebody's going to decide, do, or spend. Always just ask. The worst thing that you can get is a no, which is, in my book, is not that bad. But when you make assumptions, then you really lose out on opportunities. So that's my tip.
Now, that was Andrea Waltz. To wrap up, I'm going to share my 3 biggest takeaways from this talk. Number 1, most obvious, we got to embrace rejection as a path to success. With the Go for No method, as Andrea explained, it really encourages us to seek out rejection rather than try to avoid it. To embrace rejection, to brace yourself for the no, but realize it's not the end of the world, because this method is going to help you and it's going to help your sales team push beyond our own mental limits, and it's going to be able to uncover way more sales opportunities. Key learning number 2 is that there is a psychological aspect to rejection that's really tied into our biological wiring. So first, there's nothing wrong with knowing this. You're not broken if you feel this way. Your team isn't lackluster because they can't spend all day, every day as cold-hearted machines just pounding the pavement and facing every single no. Sales, marketing, business, it's a very emotional side of the business, more so than operations or delivery or anything else. And so Andrea really discusses how we as people are biologically wired to avoid that rejection. And it is going to hinder our willingness to take on risk. And it's going to slow people down, maybe culturally, but even as culture aside, just the biological wiring is going to keep us from asking for what we want and what we need. And so it's important that we also, as Andrea shared, create a space where our prospects and customers feel comfortable saying no. And so let's remove some of the emotion. Let's detach ourselves a little bit from it. Let's make ourselves aware that people are uncomfortable with this, but let's understand that this is something that is biologically wired into us. And so we need to make special effort to make sure we and our sales teams are comfortable going for no, but that also our prospects and customers understand that there's nothing wrong with them saying no. And this brings me to key lesson number 3. There's some practical strategies for implementing Go for No. And the first is you have to be consistent and persistent, right? Consistency is everything in business, in life, in health, in everything. And so we need to consistently and persistently seek out no at every conversation and every opportunity, because the more no's that we get to, on the backside of that are more yeses. So there you have it. Those were my 3 biggest takeaways from this talk. I'm curious, what were yours? Did anything challenge your perspective? Did anything get you really excited? Anything you're going to take back to your team? Let's dive deeper into this over on LinkedIn, where I share more insights and I love to spark conversation. My name is Mark Drager. You can find my contact details in the episode show notes. Now, while you're over on LinkedIn, be sure to follow Andrea Waltz for more motivational content and content that's really going to get you thinking. You can learn more about her over at goforno.com. You can pick up a copy of her book that's sold hundreds of thousands of copies. It's called Go for No. Yes is the destination. No is how you get there. You can also learn more about Andrea over on Facebook. She's on X as well as Instagram if you want to follow her. And one last thing, if you made it this far into the show, you really should subscribe. And here's why. Obviously, you're an ambitious B2B leader. You're hungry for more sales strategies and actual tips to grow your business and to boost sales. And that's it. That should be reason enough. Well, with that, I am Mark Drager. I want to thank you so much for listening in, and I will catch you in the next episode.